Two parties working together that got us to where we are today. And Donald Trump's nomination was the hostile takeover of the Republican Party, which heretofore had been controlled by the country club Bushes. He will have, in my opinion, a profound impact on the future of the party if he can get it back to being a party of non-elites, of working class people. I think he will achieve this reform. Column by Willie Brown, who was one of the best dressed men in the world.
Former mayor of San
Francisco. The other day, I believe it was in the San Francisco Chronicle, where he said that while the Democrats are raving about Russia, Trump's on his way to re-election. If he builds the wall, if he improves the economy, if he redoes the trade agreements, and if he gets us a more workable immigration system, he's going to get re-elected. Willie Brown's a very smart man.
Willie Brown is definitely a smart man. Would you agree that so far he has struggled in office?
Yes, but I think it has to be seen in some context. He came to Washington with no political experience. So you take some of our most productive presidents, Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson had been in the House, he'd been in the Senate, he had been vice president for 3 years before he orchestrated the murder of John F. Kennedy. If you haven't read my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, you should. But he understood how the system worked. He'd seen it up close. He knew how to get things done. Richard Nixon, 8 years as vice president, watching one of our greatest presidents, Dwight Eisenhower. He understood how Washington worked. I think Donald Trump came to Washington without any of that experience. Perhaps he was a little naive. You may remember right after the election, he met with my friend, the Reverend Al Sharpton. He met with Al Gore. He reached out the olive branch. I think he was surprised that it has been essentially slapped out of his hands. The truth is, I think that he did not appreciate the depth of resentment about his election. Understandable. Hillary Clinton spent about $2 billion. Donald Trump and his supporters spent about $200 million. The mainstream media was rigged for her. The new media was rigged for her. By all objective measures, she should have won. She and her husband had vast experience in running successful presidential campaigns. He had never done this before. So I think that he has to recalibrate. You're not going to get bipartisan consensus on anything. He's going to have to fight for everything that he gets. So while things have not been as smooth as one might want, he did very successfully get a Supreme Court justice confirmed. He's about to get another seat because I think Justice Kennedy will resign any minute now. I think.
I'm sorry. Is that you just pontificating, or you have some
I'm a
source?
man with sources. I was
breaking news here today.
I've said this previously at Infowars.com. I am certain. Thank you. My sources, and they're pretty good, tell me that Justice Kennedy's resignation is imminent, sometime in the next couple weeks, and that would give the president a second seat. If he is as sure-footed as he was in the selection of his first justice, I think he'll have a successful confirmation. We are cutting regulation on business and on Americans that is not getting the kind of coverage in the mainstream media that it might, because it's kind of a boring story. But you do see the economic indicators floating up. The stock market, which we were told was going to crash if he was elected, hit an all-time high on Friday. So you're seeing slow improvements in the economy, and he hasn't even yet gotten a tax reform package, done.
I mean, okay, so one of the core promises of the campaign was that he would repeal and replace Obamacare.
Yes.
He spent considerable time and political capital trying to get that to happen. That has failed. There was a chance it may continue, but it seems that the battle may be over for that. Is that damaging to him politically?
No, I don't think, first of all, I don't think the fight's over. Yeah, he has been betrayed by the establishment Republicans he was counting on. But thing about Trump is he's not a quitter, he's a fighter. And I don't think he has any erosion in his electoral coalition unless he quits. In other words, to fight and lose does not hurt him among his people. The only thing that hurts him among his voters is if he stops fighting. And he'll be back on health care. Now, would I have done things in a slightly different order? Yeah, I think I would have. I think I would have put forward my tax reform package, which is really an economic growth package. I think he had the most dynamic economic growth package in the primaries and in the general election. I think it's very attractive. The idea of cutting our corporate tax rate below that of Canada, Mexico, China, Japan makes an enormous amount of sense. Big American companies are doing business abroad because it's cheaper and more profitable to do so. If you make it cheaper and more profitable to do that business in the United States, they'll come back to America to expand here, to hire here, to create jobs here. His plan for inversion, where rich companies are husbanding trillions of dollars offshore instead of bringing it back in the country for fair taxation and to go to work for our economy, makes common sense. So I think I might have done economic reform first. I support the travel ban, but to be very clear, Donald Trump never said that we should freeze immigration from certain states in the Middle East for all time. He said it should be frozen only temporarily until we can get in place an immigration system that allows us to more fully vet those who apply to come here. Right now, under our system, the immigration system is not allowed to look at the social media postings of those who apply to come here. That makes no sense. That's not common sense. If somebody's saying on their Facebook feed, Ali Akbar, kill all the Jews, I don't want that person in the United States. It's just common sense.
It seems that he's in a slight bit of a bind in that he has ardent supporters who are totally with him. He's still polling in the 80s among Republicans and among people in Trump counties. But the approval rating is generally a little sub 40, which does not get you elected. And there's a wide gulf between what his supporters want him to do in terms of policy, in terms of tone, in terms of things like Twitter, and what other folks want to see him do. And it does not seem to me that that bridge is that can be bridged, those two things. What do you think about that sort of divide, that he's got his folks and they are far apart from all the other folks, and it seems like there are 60% on the other side and 40%, 39% with him?
I'm not sure that I agree with that division, but I would say that in this election, a lot of things that I never thought were possible became possible. A lot of things that I think were hard and fast rules, particularly the reading of survey research and polling, his approval rating wasn't much higher going into the election than it is today. Theoretically, at least on paper, shouldn't have been able to be elected. The truth is that both he and Hillary Clinton were extremely polarizing figures. They both had extremely high negatives. They both had an intense base or an intensity among their base of supporters that was fierce. I think Trump's support was more intense. It's one of the reasons he won. We had a couple anecdotal factors that I think no one among the elites took into consideration. The fact that he was holding these rallies and that literally tens of thousands of people were showing up, and that Hillary was having trouble getting a couple hundred people at some of her events. The fact that his supporters seemed to dominate on social media, this was anecdotal evidence that something significant was happening in the electorate that voters were not seeing. Then additionally, I think a lot of the pollsters in 2016, and I don't think that this was a willful mistake, they weren't rigging the polls. I mean, there were some who were inflating their Democratic sample to give her a lead, but most pollsters are just honest people trying to do their job and get an accurate depiction of what the electorate will look like and what an election will look like. But I think many pollsters, Republican and Democrat and unaligned, nonpartisan, believed that the makeup of the electorate was going to mirror the makeup of the electorate 4 years ago. It was never realistic to think that Hillary Clinton would get as many votes from African Americans, the same percentage, as Barack Obama. Barack Obama is an iconic American figure. He's a piece of history. And that was just never going to happen. So therefore, in a close election, a deviation of a couple points among any of the standard demographic groups is significant. Donald Trump nationally got somewhere between 3.5% and 5% more of the African American vote than Mitt Romney. Now you could say, well, that's insignificant. Yes, but it gave us Michigan, it gave us Wisconsin, it gave us Ohio, and it gave us Florida. If you look at the African American counties that are strongest in those states, we ran marginally better than Romney or McCain, and that makes a difference.
On those specific points about black voters and the Rust Belt, did not voter ID and some voter suppression methods help there?
No, I don't think so. I think what made the difference was Hillary Clinton was not only Barack Obama, she wasn't even her husband. I don't think black voters had any particular affinity for her candidacy. So again, a shift of a small number of votes. Also, many of these people just stayed home and did not vote. And interestingly enough, you have higher African American votes for the Congress, the Senate, and the other down ballot offices in some cases than you had for Hillary. I think there was a disconnect there. They did not identify with her candidacy.
This White House interpersonally appears to be in constant chaos. Lots of people getting fired, lots of people leaking and arguing back and forth.
Some people who need to be fired haven't been fired yet, but the day is young.
Well, would you like to see Anthony Scaramucci shown the door?
No, not at all. I like Andrew Dice Scaramucci.
Who would you like to be seen shown the door?
I'm not going to name any names, Dina Powell. I'm not going to throw out any names, Gary Cohn. See, I had this quaint idea that to work in the Trump White House, you probably should have supported Donald Trump for president. To work in the Trump administration, you ought to maybe support the Trump reform agenda. Now, I understand the bigger picture thought that, well, maybe we could combine the Republican establishment with the Trump train. It doesn't work that way. And sadly, I think in some cases, the president has put his trust in people who are not really with him. On the other hand, seeing Jeff Sessions announced last week that he's going to open a probe to find the leakers, this is an enormous waste of time. The leakers will never be found. And then when government becomes frustrated in their inability to find the leakers, they begin surveilling people. And when you begin surveilling people, well, you're as bad as the people you're trying to find. The FISA court, the super secret FISA court, where they will approve surveillance of an American on the basis of no probable cause, no evidence of a crime. We want to listen to Roger Stone. We want to read his emails, look at his text, just because we want to. That's scary in itself. Thank you, George W. Bush. But what you had was an extraordinary document released by the FISA court in November that reveals that tens of thousands of Americans were surveilled for strictly political purposes, and that surveillance was then, in some cases, unmasked and used for political purposes. This is 10 times worse than Watergate. 8 misfits broke into the Watergate, tried to plant bugs that never worked. 3 of them were on the CIA payroll at the time that they did it. Judge Sirica was meeting illegally with the Watergate prosecutors. Richard Nixon's ahead of the schedule the Pentagon wanted. He reached a strategic arms limitation with the Soviets. He opened the door to China. He desegregated the public schools without bloodshed or violence. He gave us the Environmental Protection Agency. He increased civil rights enforcement funding at the DOJ by 800%. He appointed more African Americans to federal office than John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson combined. If you go back and look at it, he was a pretty progressive and successful president. But he was a peacemaker. We got to get rid of him. He's a peacemaker.
To the point about Nixon, one of the things that I look at Nixon for having done is he started the war on drugs, not Ronald Reagan, but he understood compassion. There must be treatment for addicts, not just the stick, but a way of trying to take care and get people treatment. He understood that was a valuable part. Reagan changed it to more of an aggressive, we're just going to lock these folks up. And what I'm driving at is I see in Nixon a sense of compassion in many instances, a sense of trying to open doors, like you brought up China and other places. And I don't see that with Trump. I see a closing down, trying to close away from the world, trying to close away from people who don't look like him. Why do we see that? Why is that legacy of Nixon not carrying forward?
Well, your interpretation of Nixon on the war on drugs is perhaps a little more generous than it should be. Yes, it's true. There's enormous increases in funding for treatment, but the fundamental idea of incarcerating people for the possession of small amounts of drugs, and when they have no previous criminal records, has been an expensive, ignominious, racist failure. And when Chris Christie and Jeff Sessions and yes, John Kelly say they want to bring back the war on drugs, they want to refire the war on drugs, perhaps they didn't see in the campaign when Donald Trump said medicinal marijuana, leave it up to the states. I believe in states' rights when it comes to the question of medicinal marijuana. If that's what the people in the states decide they want, that's the way it should be. I'm working with a group called the U.S. Cannabis Coalition. It's a group of Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, progressives and libertarians working together to convince the president to keep his pledge. Let the states decide, as opposed to deciding we're going to bust people for using medicinal marijuana in the states where it's legal. It was also, I have to say, Richard Nixon who gave us affirmative action. Not Lyndon Johnson, not John F. Kennedy, but Richard Milhouse Nixon.
I feel like Trump does not fully grasp the notion that he's president of all the people, whether or not they support him. And one of the more specific areas you see this is perhaps in Obamacare. And when he talks about letting it fail, that means that a policy that he does not like and that he's not behind will fail, but then that will leave tremendous pain and confusion and chaos for millions of Americans.
Well, but I think what he thinks is it will step up the pressure to put in place a better system. The truth is that because the insurance carriers are pulling out, the system now, which may look great on paper, it isn't going to work. And therefore, I think what he means is you'll have an increase on the political pressure on the political elites of both parties to pass something better. It is, I'm not a doctor and I'm not an expert on healthcare, and I don't claim to be, but there has to be a better market-based way. I was very disappointed in the first healthcare proposal. It was put forward by Paul Ryan, but which we now know was actually written by John Boehner, a lobbyist for the healthcare industry. And Reince Priebus, who was previously a Wisconsin Republican chairman and whose political birthright comes from the campaigns of Paul Ryan, brought this to the president and said, well, here's your health care package. I think he did not serve the president well. Next thing you know, the president's attacking the guys in the Liberty Caucus who are his natural allies, who are outsiders like he is, and spurning what should have been a better starting point by Senator Rand Paul. So I say let's start all the way back at the beginning and find something that's market-based, but that works better for everybody.
You brought up Jeff Sessions a couple of times. Is it effective for Trump to be, let's say, publicly torturing Jeff Sessions in this way, rather than, if you are not happy, just fire him? You can do that.
Well, see, I don't think he intends to fire him. I think he'd just like him to do his job. As I said earlier, when the FISA court delivers documents to the American public that absolutely prove that the Obama administration was surveilling all these people in violation of the Constitution, in violation of the law, why have they not been prosecuted? when Bill and Hillary Clinton run the Clinton Foundation, which is not a charity, it's a slush fund for grifters, is a vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes. What they told us after Watergate was no person is above the law. Well, they're not above the law either. Is Jeff Sessions so busy trying to put people in jail for smoking medicinal marijuana that he's missing these egregious crimes which require investigation and prosecution? All I think the president wants Sessions to do is do his job.
There was tremendous anger when President Obama took office at President Bush and some of his folks around the Iraq War specifically. And there was a call in some far left circles to put them on trial or something like that, bring them up on war crimes. And I think the cooler heads in the administration said, no, that's not the way we do things in America. We want to keep moving forward. We're not going to demonize them for past mistakes. We're going to move forward. And Donald Trump seemed to have broken with that by continually bringing up Hillary for far smaller crimes than the Iraq War invasion.
I think there's a very big difference. There's a very big difference between a foreign policy mistake. And by the way, I was opposed to the Iraq War. I wrote against it then. I spoke. $6 million wedding. That's venal corruption, and it deserves prosecution.
I'm going to do a couple more questions, and we can start getting you guys involved in the conversation. So if you want to set up a mic, people can start queuing up for that. If you had to start the 2020 campaign now, and you were an insider advising the president, and starting today, he has not had significant legislative success, but you got to go into the campaign now with what you got now. And before he was sold as new, outsider, fresh blood. You can't be new again, right? So what would be the tenets, the core tenets of the Trump re-election campaign if it was starting today?
You can't game plan a campaign that's 3.5 years away after 6 months. It's not politically realistic. It's interesting that most presidents play this game with the people like, well, I don't know if I'm going to run for re-election. I might not. They delay the filing of a committee and so on. Surprisingly, the president has not done that. He's filed a re-election committee. He says that he'll run again in 4 years. But you just can't measure the success or failure of his presidency after 6 months. It's not possible to game plan.
Is it, okay, larger than Trump, as a general philosophical measure as an advisor, is it okay, is it good for democracy to lie to voters in order to move them in one direction or another?
For example, like if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Or maybe it's read my lips, no new taxes.
I'm not saying that Trump is the first one. This is a long system. A lot of things have happened. But I'm talking about more pernicious lies. And you know what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying you're a dirty trickster, but we know dirty tricks happen in general. Is that okay? Is that valuable for democracy?
One of the things we don't know, of course, is that whether when those presidents said those things, they actually believed them. If they actually believed them, then they were lies. And we go back to the beginning of politics. When he was a congressman, Davy Crockett accused one of the presidents of dressing in women's clothes.
Yes.
We accused Abraham Lincoln of having mixed-race bastard children. This is, in America, politics is a contact sport. This ain't beanbag. And we're talking about a struggle for the presidency of the United States. So is it a good idea for our presidents to lie? The point is, I think most of them, probably all of them, thought they were telling the truth when they were telling these lies. By the way, Franklin Roosevelt, your sons and daughters will not be sent away to any foreign war, 1940. 2 years later, we're at war. So I think it's got to be seen only in some context. I don't think those presidents knew they were lying. I think President Obama really believed that you could keep your health.
These things, and I'm coming to you, these things are not generally coming out of the mouth of the candidate, but folks around them start to spread the rumor that so-and-so is actually not from America, or so-and-so is actually deathly ill when they are not, or these sorts of things. You know, maybe this one raped somebody or had a child that's out of wedlock, which is something you referenced. Are these sorts of things valuable to the democracy, to add to the presidential conversation?
I strongly recommend that you read Clinton's War on Women, and I strongly suggest you read my book on the 2016 election, because unfortunately a number of the things that you mentioned have foundation in fact. They're not lies. Now, not everything, but I think we just have to be recognized that politics is not going to change. It's based on human nature, and human nature is not going to change. And therefore, it's a reality. Deal with it.
Sir.
Yes, thank you, Roger and Teray. Thanks for making this a Q&A. Those in the know understand that Trump is under siege by the left, the right, the vast majority of statists, bureaucrats, establishmentarians, all of them. Whether you love, hate, or don't care either way about the current president of America, democracy is endangered, and even if a very progressive future president rubs enough of the wrong people the wrong way, the right people the wrong way, they can be run out of office too. So this isn't just about people who are for Trump, okay? This is for